Hello, rose lovers. Thank you for joining me. I'm Rebecca Koraytem with David Austin Roses North America. Today, we're going to talk about tips, tricks, and color combinations for a stunning garden. As I travel the US, I am constantly asked design questions. So we thought this would be a great opportunity to put together our best tips for you. So often we are lured in by the scent of a rose. And Mr. Austin himself said, there is nothing more beautiful than the fragrance of a rose. Yes, David Austin roses were bred in England. And yes, David Austin roses absolutely love the United States. The varieties that we actually offer here in the States are selected to grow here. We don't offer the entire range in the US. That's because we actually trial and pick what we know is going to be successful for you. Because the beginning of any good design starts with a rose or other plants, for that fact, that do quite well. So right in the foreground of this image, we see Darcy Bustle in the long garden at David Austin's UK nursery. Darcy Bustle is a lovely crimson shrub that does quite well all across the United States and is especially good in heat and humidity. Here in the foreground, it really sets the stage for what lies beyond, which are these lovely, soft, almost dreamy pastel shades. So I like that combination there. Let's take a look at something that's a little softer and more of the pink range. Also in one of our show gardens in England, we have this lovely soft wash of pinks, of some lavender, a little bit deeper tones in there, even some apricot hues. I want you to start making note of these color combinations in your mind, because this is going to give you clues to kind of designing with a British aesthetic. Yes, David Austin roses are considered to be some of the most beautiful roses in the world because they've been bred to be both easy and rewarding. Mr. Austin himself was a rose hybridizer and author. Many of the names of the David Austins come from his passion for British literature. In 1969, he founded David Austin Roses in Shropshire, England. He is best known for creating English roses, which combine the old world fragrance and flower forms with the repeat flowering and health of the more modern roses. Now, the David Austin breeding program has introduced over 200 varieties. Some of those varieties have been retired, and not all of them are offered in the US because, again, we want to bring only what we feel is the absolute best that's going to make you successful in your garden. The roses are sold around the world in 35 countries. And if you're ever in England, you are welcome to go by and see the Austin Nursery, Show Gardens, Plant Center. It's all located in the village of Albrighton. Now, all English roses need to have these things in common. They have to be fragrant. They must repeat bloom. They're bred for disease resistance, which is a huge deal nowadays, now that we're being encouraged to use less chemicals, protect the bees, save the environment. So there is a lot of pressure for rose breeders nowadays to really strive for disease resistance over just fragrance, repeat, and then of course they have to be beautiful and graceful in the garden. You'll see many roses out there on the market that can check off 2 or 3 of these boxes, but very rarely all 4 for the same plant. David Austins that we bring to the US excel in both heat and cold because, wow, the US is such a diverse climate. They are dependable and adaptable. I'll see something that is growing in San Diego that's also thriving up in Boston. It really blows my mind how adaptive these roses are. You know, you'll see something in Southern California that's thriving, that hardly has any winter at all. And then when I travel to see customers in the heartland of the US, I find that our roses absolutely love a nice cold winter and a hot summer. What more can we ask for, right? Drought tolerance is important. Back in the day, we used to hear that roses had to have a lot of water. Well, roses will actually demand a lot of water if you train them to want the water. But we want our roses to kind of be self-sufficient. So what we really recommend doing is when you're planting them, to get them established, it's better to water slow and deep, just a few days a week, than shallow every day of the week. So often, irrigation can kill more roses than Roundup. I'm very honest with you. So if you have an irrigation system in your garden or you're planning on installing one for your design, make sure that it is a system that you can manually control, because as your roses get older, they don't require as much water. Did you know that you can plant in both spring and fall? The way that the US market is set up, we really push roses for sale in spring. That Mother's Day madness, as we all know it in the industry, where everyone feels like they have to have them for Mother's Day. And then by Father's Day or 4th of July, a lot of people want all of their roses gone. Well, if you are so lucky to find a David Austin in the garden center in, say, September or even October, grab it and plant it, because I'm going to tell you what, all of the roses that I have planted in the fall, I think got a much better start and thrived and take off, is because they can just concentrate on root growth during the winter months, and they don't have to worry about producing flowers. And then come spring, they're ready to go. Now, with fragrance being such a big thing for the David Austins, I bet you didn't know that there are 5 fragrance profiles. And depending on what type of garden you're creating, or how you may want to arrange your garden, you may want to keep these fragrance profiles in mind when you're doing the design work. The first is old rose. That is what we think a rose smells like. It's like, it just fills your senses. And examples are Gertrude Jekyll. You can say Gertrude Jekyll also. And there's an image of lovely Miss Gertrude over there. Desdemona, which is one of my new favorites, just has this stunning, just beautiful blush pink flowers and the stunning old rose fragrance. And then a good old standby, Winchester Cathedral. Americans tend to love and gravitate towards fruity fragrances. That can be a scent of apple, pear, raspberry, citrus, strawberry, jammy. You've heard it described as, and examples would be Olivia Rose Austin, the Poet's Wife, which is a yellow shrub and one of my personal favorites, James L. Austin, Benjamin Britten, and even Jubilee Celebration, which a lot of my customers tell me smells like raspberries to them. The third fragrance is very English. The British love myrrh fragrance, and it is a sweet to spicy kind of licoricey scent. It smells warm. It smells like a rose. A lot of times you tell people licorice and they go, oh, I don't think I can take that, but it really is quite lovely. Ancient Mariner, which is another amazing rose, Boscobel, Carding Mill, which we offer here and they don't offer in the UK. Queen of Sweden, Bathsheba, which is one of our newer climbers, Gentle Hermione, which I am over the moon for the fragrance of Gentle Hermione, and Strawberry Hill are all stunners. Musk, our fourth profile, actually comes from the stamens rather than the petals. So even a small amount of musk can perfume the air. Examples of this would be generous gardener, and especially our rambling roses like Albrighton Rambler, Lady of the Lake, or Malvern Hills. And finally, the tea rose fragrance. This is very conducive to our yellow and apricot colored roses, but not always. There are some pinks that have a tea scent too. It is like opening a fresh pack of China tea and you get that spicy, wonderful scent, just right up in your face. And then it dissipates to these other undertones, sometimes kind of a honey, a light rose or almond fragrance. It's a nice fragrance. It's really lovely. And some of my faves actually have a tea scent. Vanessa Bell, which is one of our new offerings, they say is almost like green tea. Golden Celebration, known for its delicious scent and is a favorite rose among our US group. Lady of Shalott, which is one of our stars that grows from coast to coast. And then again, our pink, Princess Alexandra of Kent, is totally a winner. So let's talk flower forms. Many of you think that David Austin roses have a very high petal count, and that is true, but there are just as many amazing David Austins that have a single or semi-double petal count. The singles have maybe 5 petals. An example would be the new Tottering by Gently that has just come onto the market. Semi-doubles have anywhere from 20 to 30, and then the high petal count rosette pack in a whopping 35 to 200 petals, which is amazing. Now, a lot of fans who are new to David Austin's make the terrible mistake of saying, I only want high petal count flowers, and I only want flowers with a fragrance rating of 4 or 5. Well, if you do that, you are leaving some amazing flowers on the garden bench, shall we say. When you're working in design, not everything has to be the main feature. You want some show ponies in the garden, and you want some supporting stable mates. So something that maybe has a single flower or semi-double flower is going to be an excellent supporting character in the garden. It's a lot like building a bouquet. You don't want everything to have all big coarse texture. You need some fine texture in there as well. So keep that in mind. Now, there are 2 other distinctive traits of David Austin's that I find quite charming, and Mr. Austin himself was completely enamored with. That is the button eye and the halo effect. The button eye is that nice little tight, it's like a kiss in the center of the rose. And this is James L. Austin to the left. On the right, we have the Ancient Mariner, which is one of my favorites. I know I'm naming a lot of favorites in this video, but it really is a strong grower, and we think it's going to be an amazing rose in the US over time. So with this halo effect, the petals are lighter around the outside, and then they get deeper hued towards the center. This makes it stand out when light passes through the petals. It is just charming. And again, going back to those characteristics of charm and grace in the garden. Now, with all of Mr. Austin's roses with the flowers, he selected 4 petals that allowed the light to pass through them. That's why garden photographers are absolutely gaga for photographing David Austin's, because they do so nicely. So look at this diverse array of flowers that we have to pick from. I absolutely love to see them lined up by color combinations like this. And you can see too, if you're putting on your design hat and you are trying to play with texture in the garden, there are going to be times, and I'm going to show you examples in the future, where you want a big coarse textured bloom to stand out and be the show pony. And there are other times where you're needing something a little softer, a little lower petal count to be a supporting character as an integral part of the garden. Just some more examples. Look at that. Oh, amazing. In 1961, Mr. Austin came out with Constance Spry, and she was his breakthrough rose. She is the first rose that really put him on the map and gained the recognition that he deserved. Constance Spry had these amazing old-fashioned fragrant flowers that just wowed everyone. And think about it, back in 1961, the rose form and the flower form of the day was that of the hybrid tea. So this was a tremendous departure from what everyone else was seeing. When Mr. Austin started, we must note that everyone said, no one wants to see this type of rose anymore. They're totally into the modern roses. And well, he started something definitely that proved them wrong. He kept working because, he just was not satisfied. The one problem with Constance Spry was she blooms only once. And his goal was to find a rose that repeat bloomed. In 1983, he did that with Graham Thomas. It won numerous awards, won at Chelsea. He named it after his good horticulturalist friend, Graham Thomas, who was an amazing rosarian in his own right and also an author. With Graham Thomas, it was voted world's favorite rose numerous times. I can't even tell you how many folks have won flower shows with this particular rose. The fragrance was amazing. It repeated. Look at this climber, how it flowers all the way to the ground. And that's something you don't always see. As designers, we have to keep these things in mind. So he had struck gold, so to speak, with Graham Thomas. One of the great rewards for growing David Austins in the garden is clipping them and bringing them indoors. What I'd recommend is to start early in the morning and get them before the blooms are fully open. That way you're going to enjoy at least 3 days. The David Austins do have shorter stems, so they're great for smaller arrangements, but wow, they are so plentiful, you'll have enough to put in every room of the house. Now, these lovely blooms should not be confused with our luxury cuts, which were bred specifically for the floral trade. Check these out. The David Austin luxury cut roses were 15 years in the making. They were bred to emulate the garden roses, but they needed to have a longer vase life, longer stems, and to hold up better in shipping. They're sold only to the floral trade, and we only have one licensee for the entire United States. So if you're interested in having David Austin luxury cuts for your wedding or special event, contact your favorite florist. To the right, you see Juliet. She is probably one of our most popular roses for weddings, and she is absolutely lovely, but she really doesn't have much fragrance at all. If you want to carry some David Austins down the aisle and you carry Juliet, let's say, down the aisle, and then you want to plant them in your garden, you can't plant Juliet in the garden because she's not going to thrive. But we do suggest trying Carding Mill, the Lady Gardener, perhaps Roald Dahl, or even Lady of Shalott. Now, we talked a lot indirectly about breeding. Let's go into kind of the details of this. What were you doing 10 years ago? What were you thinking about? When you think about it like that, it really puts it all in perspective. So in year one, 40,000 hand pollinations, that's little paintbrushes, dab, 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 are made over a 14-week period by 16 horticulturalists. That's a lot of work. Then in year two, we start seeing the fruition of what happened. 90,000 seedlings start to flower. Can you imagine the beauty of walking into this greenhouse and seeing all these little tagged and barcoded flowers flowering? But Someone has to make some very tough decisions. So the Alston team has been trained to start focusing very early onto what's going to repeat bloom, what's going to have disease resistance, and what's going to have those charming flowers and grace and beauty. Let's not forget of those. So that 90,000 is whittled down to about 8,000 plants that then go out to the field to be trialed for 7 or 8 years. When I was in England, David Austin Jr. was actually walking the fields with a crew going, yep, yep, no, that one's got to go. And out it would come. It would be tagged to be removed. And that's just how strict they are about this breeding process. They finally bring it down to 2 or 3 new varieties, and that is what's introduced first in England. And then a couple years later, it comes across the pond. After we've trialed it, we've quarantined it, we've made sure everything is safe, and we bring it across here and introduce it first at davidaustinroses.com, because it takes quite a while to ramp up quantities for the US market to give to our independent garden centers. And then once it's introduced with a succession of years, we're able to offer more and more. Here's Roald Dahl, which we brought out a few years ago and is quite a lovely rose. I want you to take a look at that bud. A lot of the David Austins, even if they are an apricot or a white, will start out with a pink to almost a salmony pink colored bud, and then open up into their respective colors. So when Mr. Austin was doing all this breeding, he wanted to create a rose that was a true garden rose. We like to say David Austin roses play well with others. That means they didn't have to be quarantined off into a certain section of the garden and edged with lots of little boxwood, which is quite lovely. But he wanted something that any gardener could work into their border and truly enjoy. Here we have the lark ascending and a little bit of crimson colored Darcy bustle in the foreground with salvias and catmints and probably a little geranium, looking quite lovely. So you are already ahead of the game because these roses are designed to play well in the border. So here's that question. What do you want your rose to do? Right now, I want you to close your eyes and think about that opening in your garden that needs a rose. So often we get excited about the new variety that's coming out, or I have to have this because I visited the Austin garden and I saw it and I want it. But I really want you to be successful. And in order to put the right rose in the right space, we need to look at your situation and say, what do I want this rose to do for me? This is Desdemona, one of my faves, in a large container, and it is kind of anchoring this corner. But look, there's some other stuff with the roses going on in this garden. If you look to the left, there's a very soft, pale blush colored rose that's just kind of a backup singer, if you will. It's just playing a supporting role in the border. And then far back along the wall, there's a climber softening that wall, adding some romance to the background. So see, roses can do a lot of different things for you because they are versatile. So we saw they look great in large containers. They can be used as climbers. Now, when you're picking a climbing rose, let's chat about this for one moment. There's all different sizes of climbing roses. We're going to hit on this next. You want to pick one that's not overpowering. Are you putting it on a little tutor, or are you trying to engulf an arbor to create shade? So keep that in mind. Are you going to put the rose in a border, as we see with Boscabel down in the bottom left? Or maybe you want to add a tree rose to add accent, or to be by a doorway to add fragrance right at nose height. Here's something that I never really thought about until I came to work for David Austin. Roses make amazing hedges. So when you're choosing a rose to make a hedge with, you're looking for something that grows well close together or has a little more of an upright form. I believe this is Harlow Carr in this hedge shot, and it's very thorny, so it can be a good barrier rose for you and would be quite nice in a hedge. But isn't that lovely? So let's hit on location. I cannot say enough about morning sun, afternoon shade. Roses, especially English roses in very hot parts of the US, are going to do best in this position. And I hear people all the time go, but I want to put it where it gets no morning sun and it gets full afternoon sun. I heard roses like sun, but let's qualify it. You know, a lot of times you can put a rose in a spot that you want it to go into, but it's not ideal. That harsh afternoon sun, especially in a really hot climate, could scald it. It could cause it to stress. And when a rose stresses, first of all, it's not going to look good in your design. Second of all, it's going to be more susceptible to insects and disease like black spot and powdery mildew, etc. So really heed that morning sun, afternoon shade. Roses can take, and David Austin's can take all day sun just fine. So if you have a all day sun spot, that's fantastic. 4 to 6 hours of sun. So many times people go, oh, I would really love to have a rose, but I don't have enough sun. I only have about 4 or 6 hours. Guess what? If it's morning sun, you're in business. You can have a David Austin. They will also work in high shade or dappled light. So maybe it's kind of the best of all worlds. You have all day long kind of a dappled light from some existing trees, or as the light moves around your garden, maybe you have Doug firs or cedars or oaks that kind of tamper the light for you. And that can work quite well, especially if it's giving you some protection from that hot, hot afternoon soil. But one thing that I don't bend my rules on at all is well-drained soil. Again, roses do like to have moisture. Yes, we can train them to be drought tolerant, but you never want to plant a rose where the ground is mucky. You're just not going to be successful and you're going to have a lot of disease issues. So here in the corner, this is Gertrude Jekyll. It's getting some lovely morning sun. And one thing in particular about this rose is it does like cooler climates in the US or a cooler position in the garden. I actually had a Gertrude Jekyll that came with a house that I bought in Asheville, North Carolina, and it was on southwestern exposure and got radiant heat from a big brick chimney. And it really, even though Asheville is a cooler climate for the South, it was not really happy in that spot. It was just a little bit too hot for it. So remember, sometimes if you're in like Arizona or Southern California or Texas, keep in mind reflective heat as well. If you're in a really hot area, rather than planting something right up against a wall or a stucco structure or brick structure that's going to get reflective heat, you might be better to plant it out a little bit further in a bed. I get that feedback a lot from some of my better gardeners in the Arizona area, that they're having wild success with Olivia Rose Austin, but they're just careful to put it out in the garden in an island bed, and it's not right up against the house where the temperature gets even hotter. Let's talk containers. So containers are a godsend when your soil is too difficult to work or too nasty and mucky to work in. If you have accessibility issues, it's again a total win-win, because rather than having to bend down to do so much work, it's right there for you. If you live in a townhouse and you have only paved surfaces, again, what a win with a container. And then You know, a lot of times with my morning coffee, I walk around my garden and I go, look how lovely the light is here. And sometimes I've chosen to snuggle a container into an existing border. Now, here we have Princess Alexandra of Kent. She is excellent for containers. And as with you would with a rose out in the garden, I suggest you deadhead frequently and don't be shy about pruning to shape the rose up so it doesn't overgrow the container. A lot of people get hung up that it's not February, it's not March, I can't prune anymore. That's malarkey. Especially if you're working in a container, just shape the plant so that it looks good. Now, there are tips to planting in a pot. First of all, you want to choose the right pot. You want to get something that is really nice and deep. I normally tell people about knee height. I'm 5'7", so that gives you an idea. Fill it with high quality potting soil. Rather than putting styrofoam and broken up shards in the bottom of my pot, I always just put a screen over the bottom of the hole. Make sure you've got really good holes drilled in the bottom of the pot, and even better, put them on pot feet, which we'll talk about later. But I find in the US, our climate tends to be hot and more extreme, and we want that extra moisture in our pots because they can dry out pretty fast. If you're in a really hot area, you may consider using a glazed container rather than terracotta, which tends to evaporate moisture faster. If you're in a cold climate and things are going to freeze and shard and split in the winter months, you either want to go to a frost-proof pot or have the ability to wheel that pot into a garage or protected area through the winter months. When you are working in a container, it's a lot like doing design in the garden. It's good to have repetition. It's good to have rhythm. So if you're a collector of a lot of David Austins, which a lot of people are, one of my favorite ways is to put them in a pot and actually use the same type pot to unify the design. Or if you've got, I always prefer to try to use the same type pot if possible, but if you are changing pots, use the same type flower. Now, please, please, please make sure that the surface is level. Nothing can kill a great looking design like a pot that's leaning sideways. So if you happen to be designing in a situation that is a slight slope, make sure you build a platform that is level to set the pot atop, all right? Always put pads or some type of feet under your pots. You can scoot them in so they're not visible, but it allows to make sure you've got good drainage. Again, roses don't like wet feet. Size matters, folks. When you are picking your dream rose to do whatever it is that you want it to do, I want you to really read the label. Here in the United States, especially in our warmer climates like California, Texas, even Colorado in the summer can really heat up. The South, roses get bigger than we say on the tag, all right? Roses in general in the US are bigger than they are in England. It's the exact same genetics. It's just we have a very favorable climate and they get so much larger. So plan that in. The climbers, I promise you, add 2 to 4 feet on them, both height and width. And some of the shrubs even 2 to 4 feet extra on if you live in a warmer area. If you're up where it freezes a lot, if you're in Wisconsin, Vermont, upstate New York, you can kind of go closer to what the tag says. But that big bearing is how harsh your winter is here. So Generous Gardener is up at the top left. There is a reason this is called the Generous Gardener. You get a lot of rose for your money. I'd recommend this for covering a pergola or an arbor. Bathsheba, one of my absolute new favorite climbers. Yummy, yummy fragrance. And look at that halo effect on those flowers. The British came right out the gate saying, this is a climber. They didn't say this can be a shrub or it could be a climber, which we're going to talk about soon. And then Malvern Hills down below. Wow. If you are looking for a rose to plant on a slope or eat up some land in the back 40, something that you can get a lot of bang for your buck for, plant a David Austin Rambler. I'll tell you why. They repeat bloom. Most ramblers only flower once, but a David Austin English Rose Rambler smells great and it repeats. So that is a bonus there. Strawberry Hill. I love this. This is a little bit smaller climber. And I think this was smart what they did here. This is actually in the David Austin Rose Garden in Osaka, Japan. Very lovely rose to go over this little arch. And rather than planting it again, they've used a smaller pink, let's say maybe it's the Mary Rose or the Mayflower down below. So they have carried that unity through, and then you have a little bit of a white focal point in the back. But that's choosing the right rose for the spot. So can some shrubs be climbers and some climbers be shrubs? Absolutely yes. I get this call a lot. A lot of our independent garden centers call us and go, Rebecca, I only want to order the shrub version of Lady of Shalott, or I only want to order the climbing version of Lady of Shalott. It's the same genetics. Remember back in the beginning, we talked about Mr. Austin crossed these old roses with the new modern roses. Well, a lot of these older species roses were big, voluptuous girls, and they like to spread out. And a lot of that genetics comes through. If you are willing to prune, yes, you can keep some of these climbers as shrubs. But Americans are very busy folks, and a lot of times we don't have the patience that our British counterparts have for keeping things in check. Lady of Shalott and Teasing Georgia, which is a lovely yellow, behave the same way. They have a lot of the similar characteristics for use in the garden here in the US. Lady of Shalott is wonderful espaliered against the wall. In a privacy fence, I like to see her growing in the corner of a privacy fence and just kind of tumbling over the edges. I saw a lovely Teasing Georgia grown that way in Marietta, Georgia. That's kind of fitting, Teasing Georgia in Marietta, Georgia. But left alone, they will be these big arching shrubs in a border. So again, if you have a lot of territory that you want to eat up or a lot of real estate that you need to fill up, that might be a nice rose for you. Again, what do you want your rose to do? So as we have been going through this and chatting, I'm hoping you're starting to think about your own garden. Are you needing to accent something with a tree? Or perhaps take one of our smaller climbers and put a tutor there and accent or punctuate an end of a row. Are you needing something to blend with other plants? Again, this is shot in one of our gardens there in England, and it is a bit aggressive for just your average backyard, but I'm not saying you can't do it. One of the things I do want you to pay attention to are these color combos, because we're going to be talking about that pretty soon. Remember that English roses are versatile, and I always get a lot of questions about pruning. So we touched on it with the large container. Just keep that rose trimmed as needed to be there in the container. How long can it stay in the container really depends on what you pick and your own seasons. Um, you, I get questions a lot of times in cooler areas, should I put 2 or 3 roses in one container? You can, but I think that it's going to overgrow the space. In most US cases, if you're up in Vermont, that might work for you. As for climbers, I normally in the first year like to prune my roses back just a little bit and let them get the number of canes that I want, and then start training those canes. And then as the leaders come off of the main canes, I trim those back to about 6 to 8 inches. For roses that are in a border, the first thing I do is take out dead, diseased, or dying. And then I just look at the roses' position in the garden and trim up what I need, trying not to take more than about a third at a time. If it's a tree rose, I just kind of round it out and shape that rose out. I do most of my pruning when the new foliage starts coming out, but I am not shy, at least, about trimming something back if I'm in June or July. These are garden roses. They're not hybrid teas, so there's no need to open up any centers. If you're going to train something as a hedge, a lot of times you should plant it a little closer together and then start trimming it in that shape that you are trying to achieve. So let's pair color like a Brit. Not that you have to do this, but if you really want to take your garden to the next level, I highly recommend you try doing this. So in a visual area, try to keep crimsons, pinks, blushes, and whites all together. In a visual area, try to keep apricots, yellows, creams, and whites together. It's, it's not a must. Here in the US, we have no problem saying, I love this rose, so it's going right next to, I'm putting my yellow pilgrim right next to my Munstead wood. If that makes you happy, go ahead and do it. But I really do like this aesthetic. So several years back, I had the pleasure of going across the pond to help David Austin Roses with their open house in England. And this is their cold packing shed that they transformed to give their UK retailers some inspiration. And I was so taken by it, I photographed it and I wanted to share this with you. So down below is Harlow Carr, which smells amazing. And though it has a lot of thorns, this is the perfect use for it. Just carpet an area with it. Accenting either side of the door is Gentle Hermione that gets that heavenly myrrh fragrance right up by your beezer. If you look to the right, that is the Generous Gardener, okay? They have it trained a little tutor. You have to realize this is inside and this was put together for a show. I would probably only do one Generous Gardener on one side of the door and have it go up, and it could do its thing on a 2-story house because it gets really large here. But lovely, lovely rose indeed. So for a formal look, this is Boscabelle. And one of the ways you can do it is hedge in your little parterre and use all of one of your very favorite roses. I think this is lovely. It's charming. It totally works. The reason these roses are in the foreground is that they were trying to show their customers that rather than having customers pluck roses from the display, just put some out front and keep restocking it. And that way they can put it in their cart and head to the till. Now, I love this because this really pushed the envelope for me, and it made me start thinking out of the box. Gardens in England are a lot smaller than they are here, but if you live in a major metropolitan area, you too probably have a deck or outdoor living space that is only this big. What if you floated a floor over a container, or you had a roof deck and you were so bold as to plant coarse textures with your roses all tucked in like a big container design. And then you've got some vertical foliage there. You have, these were L.D. Braithwaite trees. We have retired L.D. Braithwaite, but we do offer Darcy Bustle trees, and that could give a very similar look. I think this is really, really nice. Is it something that would work long term? No. But for something for a couple of seasons, just to enjoy pushing the envelope, I think this is fun. For those of you who are really enamored with container gardening, look at this luscious apricot yellow scheme. And I love how they just made this little cocoon where you can hang out and read and sip your lemonade and be surrounded by all of your favorite roses and some of your favorite perennials. Look at that, how the foliage of the heuchera is really kind of a main player in this group. And then how British. Come join me for tea. We have stunning pilgrim growing along the backing containers. We have lavender. On our whites, we have tranquility that's down on the floor. I think we've got some Desdemona and possibly some Winchester Cathedral in there. And over to the far right, looks like that may be Golden Celebration, but a very, very British combination with the yellows and lavenders, or yellows, purples, and blues. So as we're getting to the end of this talk, I want to inspire you even more with these winning combos by Michael Marriott, our head rosarian and technical director. This kind of takes you from early season through the fall, because remember, our roses are going to be repeat blooming. So here we have Charlotte as our accent color paired with analogous colors. Chartreuse in here makes the foliage pop. It makes all flower colors pop. So we've got foxglove. If you live in a climate where it's too hot for foxglove, try digiplex. That's really nice. Catmint and cranesbill geranium. Here's this lovely Queen of Sweden as a hedge, hedging off a meadow area. And it's so delightful with sweet pea and daisies in the background. You know, I have never really planted roses as a hedge for myself, but it's something that I'd like to add. And these pale tones are actually pretty with the frothiness of the daisies. So that's a nice combo. So if you can practice restraint in a visual area, this is a nice touch. Look, they have snuggled one Harlow car, or maybe this is 3 Harlow cars that have been kind of placed right beside a bench or right behind a bench. That fragrance is going to just be absolutely delicious. And then it's a very simple combo with salvias, some grasses that are going to dance in the breeze. How lovely is this? So here's another tip. Allow one rose, pick your favorite rose, to be the show and steal that show. Okay, so most red, quote unquote red, David Austin roses have what we call a crimson color or crimson base to them. Benjamin Britten has a much more orange base to it. So when I'm working with Benjamin Britten, I don't really care to combine it with our crimson tones. I prefer to pair it with yellows or apricots like Lady of Shalott. If you were to look into the eye of Benjamin Britten, you would see a little yellow center. So it's kind of a hot color, and I like to cool hot colors down, especially in very glary or hot environments, with silvers or blues or pale purples. White can be a little bit harsh to me. So I really like how this blue cools down and plays off of the warmer tones of Benjamin Britten. Now, this is a rule breaker for me, but I'm absolutely wild about this combo. When I was taking landscape design, I was always told you never one white, one pink, one white, one pink. That's not great design, but it works here. And I think the reason that it works is because visually, the flowers, Susan William Ellis and Mary Rose, have kind of a similar texture, shape, and height. I love the Virginia in the foreground being coarse and kind of giving you something else to anchor this. And then the origeron or Mexican fleabane that you see over to the right is nice and soft. So yes, you can break some rules. Just remember that when you're alternating colors like that, you need to have things that are similar in size and shape. So going later in the season, we have Crimson Hued Darcy Bustle and Thomas a Beckett, set off by Purple Salvia, Cardona, and ornamental grasses. I am a tremendous fan of using ornamental grasses with roses. And if you are new to this whole design game, or you're old to this design game, and you have a lot of hodgepodge of colors, you can add unity by adding something purple to that border and sewing it all together. Absolutely love this. So this is really working in visual layers. So we have the apricot colors of Grace and Lady of Shalott are just smashing with the chartreuse and yellows and the deep greens of the grasses. So look, you're working in the chartreuse layer, then you have this apricot layer, and then you have this taller grass layer that adds movement and some dynamics to the landscape. Very, very pretty. Another way you can add unity to your borders. The reason I talk about unity so much with roses is often we've been collecting for quite a while and we have this real mishmash going on out there, and we refuse to dig up our roses. We refuse to say, okay, I'm sorry, we need to put something else in here to, to kind of tidy things up. We're going to keep those roses. We spent good money on them. So what can we do to sew the fabric of this garden together? And I think this is a nice way to do it. Now, I am over the moon for this combination. As you near fall, roses always have their big push when they first bloom. And then the second and third flush is a little bit smaller. And then in the height of summer, the heat of summer, you really shouldn't expect a whole lot from your rose. You want to let it slow down and kind of get ready for the final hoo-ha. That is in fall. When those night temperatures start to cool off again, we also start seeing perennials and some seasonal annuals like mums come out with these very fall colors. Look at this yummy rolled doll paired with a very brave colored Rudbeckia hirta. And I like how that very light lavender in the background of the saponaria softens everything. So earlier we talked about how pale blooms can look so luscious with paler supporting companions, but be brave and go bold sometime and you can come out with something really stunning. And as we're starting to say goodbye to the garden, we can't help but fall in love with asters in that lovely shade of purpley blue pairing with Lady of Shalott. That is just so nice. So, if you had a blank slate, what would you plant? We all had that starter home and we thought it was hopeless. Maybe we're still in our starter home and it's our forever home, but look what you can do. So often when we start to fall in love with roses or gain confidence that we can finally work with roses, we have this on our hands, a garden that's already quite well developed. So what I would tell you is go in and look at the spots maybe where you've been playing with annuals or you have something that you're not really attached to, and put something like a rose or two or five or six in its place. Here, because this is a really green design, I would probably go in with something like a tranquility and put it where you see the white annual color up halfway or three-quarters the way down the walkway. That's Dutchman pipe vine on the fence. I love that they didn't plant it on both sides. I absolutely love that. Well, did you know you could take a rose like, let's say, Winchester Cathedral or Desdemona that has a white or very pale blush colored flower. And just because it is not a climber, you can train anything to be a climber. It's all about the scale of the situation. So what I would do is probably plant two or three, say Winchester Cathedral, down on the back side of this fence, and just train them to kind of weave through and keep them pruned accordingly, and it will give the same visual effect. Now, there's Secretia over in the rock planter to the far left. That could be an interesting place to put a tree rose. That may even be something, because we're kind of echoing some purple tones off of that crepe myrtle in the background. We may want to do something like the Princess Alexandra of Kent, the pink rose that we saw in the container earlier. Might be a fun addition there, and just plant it there after you have been, tired of the Secretia. So get creative about, you don't have to have a rose only garden. You can incorporate roses into your existing garden. Why? Because they play well with others. So this was one of our office assistants at Southern Living, and she wanted us to redo her garden for her. She was an avid lover of color, and she said, I want this to be as bright and bold as possible. This was back in the day when knockout roses were hot on the scene, and you can see where we put them in. You could completely change the mood of this garden by changing out the, I think that was new gold lantana and angiosperma maybe, angelonia that's purple. You could totally go to whites and lavenders and blush tones in this garden and still keep the crepe myrtles there and have a whole different vibe. I think now if I were going to add a rose, I remember that gets morning sun over that garage. I would probably put a trellis over the garage or some type of little arbor above that and train a climber there. Also, look at the magic triangle happening here. When you're designing your garden and you're trying to cheat a little bit, put an imaginary triangle, and it can be isosceles or equilateral, whatever you want it to be. Mix it up and go, okay, we have purple, purple, purple. We have yellow, yellow, yellow. And if you can rotate that around the design, that is kind of a way you can cheat and look like you're a pro, because you're moving that color and texture around the entire design, and it's helping unify it. So we've talked about new landscapes. We've talked about working your roses into existing landscapes. Now, how about putting your roses in with food? Oh my goodness. This was the vegetable garden of all vegetable gardens that we photographed when I was with Southern Living in Louisiana. And you've all heard and seen these amazing parterre rose gardens. Well, this was basically a parterre vegetable garden. That is a ginormous framework in the middle with 4 figs growing on it, and they're going to be trimmed and trained to be like a green shade box. But that could be roses there. Along in the foreground here, I believe there's some blueberries there. That could be roses there. There's a little tuteur. You could introduce roses on tuteurs with your vegetables. You know, roses and a lot of the David Austins have absolutely stunning hips on them. So just quit deadheading towards the end of summer, and you can have some nice showy hips for fall. Well, this concludes my presentation, and it has been a pleasure sharing my design tips with you. If you have a question you want to reach out to me, contact your garden center that shared this presentation with you, and they'll show you how to get in touch with me, Rebecca Koraytem at David Austin Roses, and I'm happy to answer whatever I can for you. Take care, seek refuge in your garden, and enjoy.